Happy Easter, everyone. We're so glad that you've joined us this morning to celebrate Easter Sunday online. And wherever you are watching across the country, possibly, we're just really glad that you've joined us this morning to celebrate Jesus. What this day means for us is so incredible. It means life. It means joy. It means freedom as He just rose from the dead for us. God gave us His Son, and we're going to celebrate what He did by sending His Son because He loved us so much. So let's sing that together. For God so loved the world that He gave. For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, and whosoever believes will not perish, they shall have eternal life. I shall hold to the cross, I shall hold to God alone, for His love has savaged me, for His love has set me free. For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, and whosoever believes will not perish, they shall have eternal life. I shall wait upon the Lord, I shall wait upon His word, and by His grace I am released, and by His grace I am redeemed. Oh, for God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, and whosoever believes will not perish, they shall have eternal life. We are here this morning to celebrate that by His precious blood we have been set free. So let's just sing that together. By His precious blood I have been set free, for the glory of Jesus' name. I surrender all now to Christ alone. In Jesus I am saved. By His precious blood I have been set free, for the glory of Jesus' name. I surrender all now to Christ alone. In Jesus I am saved. For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, that whosoever believes will not perish, they shall have eternal life. They shall have eternal life.
Good morning, DCC, and welcome to Easter Sunday. My name is Steve Pasquale, and DCC has been my church home for the last 10 years. We're really glad that you join us today, and we're happy that you're spending this time with us. We at DCC are committed to supporting our neighbors in our community, and we're glad that you're here today as we talk about being for each other together. One of the things that we have happening right now is that we've established 4 response teams to help those in our area that are in need and those in our community that can use some assistance. Something that we've done this week is that we've decided that we are going to reach out to local healthcare workers and grocery store employees in an effort to thank them for what they're doing every day that they go to work. So you'll be seeing some things that are going to come up in the very next couple of days, and we're going to be able to share our thanks with these folks that are doing important work every day. Easter week is one of the biggest giving days of the year, and this year we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to take 100% of our offering, and we're going to use it to support our local hospital workers and grocery store employees. We're going to do that by purchasing food from local restaurants while supporting them as well. I want to make sure that we remind you that there are 2 ways to give. You can go to our website at dulleschurch.org, or you can download the app on the App Store at Dulles Community Church. So we're all feeling a little bit pent up, and we're inside an awful lot. So right now we have a new option for you coming up on Saturday, April 18th at 10 a.m., and we're going to do some yoga. This is going to be online in the comfort of your own home with no one else to judge you, and it's going to be led by our own Emily Stapleton. In order to do it and join in with us, you're going to click the join button at the top right-hand corner of our website. While we're doing this yoga, Emily is going to lead us in prayer and reflection on 1 Peter 5:7, which will remind us to cast all your anxiety on him, for he cares for you. Okay, we've got something new and fun to announce as well. If isolation is wearing on you, we've got a contest. If you're the first or 10th person to guess what we could have waiting for you because isolation is wearing on you, you will be the lucky grand prize winner. Okay, so one last thing. While we're online in this community together, worshiping God, please feel free to use the contact and connect button while chatting with the folks that are here with you. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and happy Easter.
I can guarantee this is an Easter we're probably never going to forget, and our history books will be writing about. It's an unprecedented way to gather on Easter morning, and yet it doesn't matter the building, it doesn't matter the place. What matters is what happened on this day so long ago. Welcome to all of you, to the Dulles family, but also to those joining us for the first time. We're really happy to have you this morning, and I want to spend Easter morning asking and hopefully answering well, as best as I can here, this idea of challenge and hurt and struggle and pain when Jesus and following Jesus is supposed to be so much about promise and hope and good. And I think that really describes pretty well my early days of faith. 29, 30 years ago, when I was trying to land on what I believed and what I believed about Jesus, there was so much drawing me into him. The more I read about him, the more I spent time in his stories, the more I heard the way he thought ethically about situations and challenges we face, the more that Jesus spoke to me, and the more I started talking to him, the more compelled I was by who he was. And yet there was this part of life that caused me to hesitate in going all in with Jesus. It really kind of haunted me, and it was these moments, like the more I would give him access to me, to my life, to control of my life, the more I would, and I use the word surrender now, the more I would really kind of just give him my life and pursue him, surrender my life to him, I would notice still moments of struggle or pain or crisis, and I had trouble reconciling. Like, where is God in this? I thought he was supposed to be about good and life. And so that's what I want to speak to today on this Easter morning. And I want to read a story, one story in particular from the life of Jesus. And before we do, I want to pray with you. And it's a simple prayer. God, my prayer today is that I would be out of the way here and this virtual experience we're having would not distract us, that we would experience you. Help us, God, today to experience you. Okay, so before I get into the story this morning, I want to just revisit briefly the story we looked at last week. When Jesus was in a boat with his disciples, they went into a storm, this ferocious storm. In fact, two of the gospel writers who tell the story use the word furious. It was a furious storm. These disciples, or at least some of them, were fishermen, and they knew the Sea of Galilee well, and this storm was awful. The waves, we're told, were crashing over the boat, and they were freaked out. They were fearful for their lives, and their instinct was to find Jesus. Where's Jesus? Jesus can fix this. Jesus will know what to do. And they find him sleeping in the bottom of the boat. And so last week, and I'm not going to review the whole message, you can see it or listen in to it on our YouTube channel or our podcast, but the point of last week was asking the question, how could Jesus sleep at a time like this? How could Jesus be sleeping in the middle of the storm? And the answer was that he was perfectly at peace with the Father's plan and the Father's power. He knew they were going to the other side. They were going to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. They were going to give life and hope and healing to many, many more people. And he knew that. And he was at peace with that whole plan. Now, he does calm the storm, but before he calms the storm, he uses the storm to help the disciples see that they don't fully understand who he is yet. If they fully understood who they were with, that he doesn't just do these miracles randomly, that he is the one who the waves and wind will obey. He is the creator of the wind and the waves. If they fully understood that, they could go through the storm with confidence because they know who's with them. It's not that they'd pretend that the storm isn't happening or the waves aren't real. It's just that they know we're going to get through the storm because we're with the one who created the wind and the waves. They would go through the storm knowing the storm doesn't pose a threat. Now, I review that point because it sets up this story that we're going to look at today. This is a story getting close to Easter week. So early after the life of Jesus, early on in church history, the week of Easter, leading up to Easter, became known as the Passion of Jesus, or the Passion Week. The story we're going to read is just a few days before Easter week begins. And so I'm going to back up just a couple days earlier than that, when Jesus is, he's really kind of crossed the line with the religious leaders. The arrogant religious leaders called the Pharisees are trying to get rid of him. Jesus is constantly spending his time with all kinds of irreligious people. People far from God, people with regrets, people who are known as sinners. In fact, we're told in Luke 15 that the Pharisees are complaining that again, Jesus is spending all of his time with notorious sinners. Not just sinners, but well-known sinners in towns and villages. Jesus is spending time with the lonely, with those who are sick and have diseases that the religious people deem is unclean. And they have decided as a religious leadership, he can't possibly be from God and spend his time with those kinds of people. That's not who a godly person would spend time. He would be spending time with holy people like us if he was really from God. And so they are considering trying to get rid of Jesus for this. And then Jesus says, before the story we're about to read, two things that incite them to plot his death. First, he refers to the temple. The most sacred place to all the Jewish people was the temple that in the Old Testament contained the presence of God on earth. And Jesus says about the temple God's presence isn't in that building anymore. It's me. I'm the temple. And this temple will be torn down and in 3 days rebuilt. Not only did they not understand what that meant, they thought it was blasphemous that he's referring to himself as the temple. And then the second thing he does is compare himself or equate himself with the Father. He said, the Father and I are one. And that was it. That was the final line that he crossed, and the Pharisees began plotting his death. So, he and the disciples leave Jerusalem. The disciples are fearful for his life, and he's essentially now getting death threats. So not only does he leave Jerusalem, he leaves the whole region of Judea. And no sooner does he get out of Judea than this story happens in John chapter 11. Jesus is very close to 3 siblings. It seems from the gospel writers that it's almost like they're best friends. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus are 2 sisters and a brother. And Jesus gets word that Lazarus, his close friend, is very sick. And that's where we pick up here with this story. Now, there's some odd things, just like, early in my faith when I would read that the storm is raging and the disciples are freaking out, and I'm thinking, yeah, I would too. That would be me. And then Jesus is sleeping in the boat, and that was so confusing to me. This God of hope and life and good and peace seems indifferent or passive, or is he like messing with us? Well, we're about to read another story that messed with me early in my faith, and there's some odd behavior by Jesus here. Now again, this is just a few days before the Easter week begins. And so here we go in John 11, verse 3. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, the sickness will not end in death. No, for it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Okay, now listen to these verses 5 through 6. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sisters and Lazarus. That's a statement that would suggest to me, so he got on a horse and rode right away to Lazarus. Or he told the disciples, we've got to get to him quickly. The emphasis here is that Jesus loves these 3 dearly. But that's not what happens. In verse 6, so, after saying how much Jesus loves Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, so when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. That used to confuse me. Now, the disciples and the people in the story don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what you and I know. And if this story is new to you, I'm just going to tell you, Lazarus ends up dying here. And Jesus chooses, when he gets word that Lazarus is sick, to stay 2 more days. Think of somebody right now that you would consider a procrastinator. And there's nothing worse, right, than a procrastinator, and especially the procrastinator who knows something's important to you or knows the deadline's really crucial or important and is still late or still procrastinates. And I had a really bad moment when I was a junior in high school. We were finishing up driver's ed and going into behind the wheel, and we were doing sign-ups. And we had to take the sign-up paper for behind the wheel home and get our parents' signature, fill it out. And so 2 of my close friends, the very next morning, went to school, went to the office to drop it off, and learned that when you drop off the behind the wheel signups together, you're in the same class and you essentially do behind the wheel together in one group. And they stopped and said, hey, let's wait for Brad, which I thought was great. These are great friends. And when the story's over, they weren't good friends anymore. They waited for me. So they saw me later that day and said, hey, have you turned in your behind the wheel form yet? And I said, no. And they said, okay, we're going to wait for you. Bring it tomorrow. The next day, they're waiting for me at the beginning of school. And I had forgotten. And they were like, what? Like, what's wrong with you? So the next day, I don't remember exactly the timing. I want to say this, my memory kind of feels like it went on for a couple weeks. It was probably about a week. The next day, I forgot to get my parents' signature or something, and so they waited another day. This went all the way up to the deadline, the last day. And on the last day, they still were waiting for me. I walked into school that morning with my behind-the-wheel form, went to the office, dropped it off, and went to my first class. And my 2 friends, I think it was after first period, took their forms, or they saw me and said, hey, are you ready to go? And I said, oh, I dropped my form off when I came into school this morning. So they said, okay, they went to the office to drop theirs off, and the office told them that all the behind the wheel classes had just filled and the last spot had just been filled like an hour ago, which I knew was most likely me. And man, these friends were not happy at all, which is an understatement with me. And to make matters worse, I asked them why they waited till after their first class. Why didn't they take their form in which they didn't like that at all. And I said they're not friends anymore, but actually we are still friends, thank God. There's just nothing worse. There's nothing that brings us down from something we're excited about, we're anticipating, something that's a priority to us, when somebody close to us just isn't prioritizing it. They're procrastinating, they're putting it off. It's almost like they don't respect what matters to us. And that is exactly how I looked at Jesus, with so much about him that is love and good and healing for us. And he has a future in mind for each of us. I would read stories like this. I'd come into this random sort of place in the life of Jesus where I would just stop, and it would almost feed my cynicism. It almost kind of pushed me back a little bit, like, wait a minute. He waited 2 days, and it feels to me a little bit like what sleeping in the bottom of the boat felt like early in my faith, in the middle of that storm. Okay, so continuing in verse 7, we're going to make sense out of this. He's told the disciples Lazarus is sick, and then he waits 2 more days. Then he says, after the 2 days, to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. The disciples are worried for him. They're like, but Rabbi, a short while ago the Jews there were trying to stone you, and you're going to go back? Like, that's a dangerous place for you right now. It's like certain death if you go anywhere near Jerusalem. Bethany, where Lazarus lives and is very sick, it's very close. It's almost like a suburb, a very little town east of Jerusalem. And they're telling him, if you go anywhere near Jerusalem, I mean, you're putting your life in your own hands. What they don't realize yet is that Jesus is moving toward death in order to bring Lazarus and all of us back to life. And the disciples don't know that yet. But that's where this story is really going. Verse 11, after he had said this, that he wants to go back to Lazarus, close to Jerusalem, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. Here's another odd statement. This messed with me so much. Like, I don't understand what Jesus is doing right now. Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, well, Lord, if he sleeps, then that's good. Sleep's good for you. The sleep will help him get better. Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. He goes on to say, Lazarus is dead. In verse 14, he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I am glad I was not there. This is just such odd language, like bizarre. Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe, but let us go to him. There's this sort of semantics dialogue happening between Jesus and the disciples. They have to be thinking, wait, for our sake, what does this have to do with us? This is about Lazarus. You know, if I'm the disciple, I'm thinking that. Sometimes, I wrote here, when we think that life following Jesus is about good and promise and hope, like we started talking about here, we can run into these moments in life of crisis, or it looks like Jesus is indifferent or doesn't care, or maybe Lazarus isn't the priority that he used to be. Something's changed in his relationship. And of course, none of that's true. Jesus is about to draw out here what he's really getting at. And it's at the end of this verse 15. He says, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there. So weird to say I'm glad I wasn't there, so that you may believe. And that's the key. This is about Jesus helping the disciples believe. That was confusing to me because early in my faith, because the disciples have already come to the point here of saying you're the Messiah. They already have seen him perform so many miracles. They know he has power from God. He's been identifying himself as one with the Father, which they believe. They already believe. And yet he's saying, we're going to go back to Lazarus, and I'm glad I delayed so that you will believe. There's something in that he's trying to draw out, and that's really the point that I want to unpack here. That leads me to ask the question, believe what? I mean, if you already believe that he's God, if you already believe he's the Messiah, if you already believe that he heals people, like what is he talking about? Believe what? Verse 16, I'm going to just read through this next section so we see what's happening here, and then I want to focus on a few verses later. Then Thomas, the one who would doubt his own resurrection, he said after Jesus was resurrected, I won't believe it unless I can touch the scars for myself. Thomas says to the rest of the disciples, then let's go back that we may die with him. On Jesus' arrival, he found that Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days already. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come out from Jerusalem to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed home. Okay, this is really key what happens here with the sisters. Lord, Martha says to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not be dead. My brother would not have died. This is a statement of faith. This is actually a statement understanding that Jesus is the Messiah. I've seen you heal so many people. I've seen you do things that no human can explain. I've heard you teach with authority and love like no human has ever spoken. I know who you are. You heal people when they're sick. If you had been here, Lazarus wouldn't have died. And then she goes on to say something here, really key, unlike what her sister Mary will say later. Martha goes on, and it's as if her faith stretches beyond human reason at this point, just a few days before Easter week. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. Okay, we'll come back to that. Continuing with the story in verse 23, Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, well, I know he will. I trust that you are going to bring all of us who've put our faith in you back to life in eternity, in the future. She says, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at that last day. In verse 25, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Here's the word belief again. Believe. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? This is all about belief. And what was challenging to me was that these are all people. Everybody in the story believes that Jesus is the Messiah. They believe that he's this healer. They've seen people who could never walk when Jesus touched them. They've seen blind people who they've known their whole lives receive sight. And there's many, many eyewitness accounts to this. There's 4 gospel writers who write their own stories, eyewitness accounts of Jesus. These people believe that he's the Messiah and that he heals. And yet Jesus is trying to draw out. He says to the disciples, I'm glad I delayed. It's for your sake so that you will believe. And now he's saying to Martha, the one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Well, she says, yes, Lord. I believe that you're the Messiah and that the Father sent you here. Now, when Mary, the sister, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was, she saw him, fell at his feet, and she says something similar. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. She's expressing the same faith. What we're learning about the sisters here is they have faith in Jesus, but their faith has a limit. They believe that Jesus can heal anyone who's sick, but when death happens, there's finality in death. That's what both of their statements meant. If you had been here, you would have healed Lazarus and he would still be with us. But you're too late. And this is getting to the heart of something that Jesus is trying to draw out in us and produce in us, develop in us. days before the Easter week begins. The kind of belief that Jesus is trying to draw out here is belief that he will soon display the ability to bring us back from spiritual death. Not just heal people who are sick, physically sick, but actually have power over death. He's trying to prepare us, he's trying to prepare his closest friends and followers for what's about to happen in the coming week. When Jesus saw Mary and Martha weeping, and the Jews who'd come from the city to grieve with them, and that they're weeping and emotional about this, it moves him. We see here in this shortest verse of the Bible, 2 words in verse 35, just such a simple expression, and yet one of the most powerful verses in the Bible, that Jesus weeps. And in Jesus weeping in front of Lazarus' tomb, we see him identifying with us, with our hurt, with our loss, with our grieving, with our crisis and crisis of faith. Verse 35, Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved Lazarus." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind," another statement of faith, "could he who opened the eyes of the blind man, because we've seen him do that, couldn't he have kept this man from dying?" They're asking, wow, couldn't he have gotten here in time? Or was there something about Lazarus' sickness? Was there something about this crisis? Was there something about this pandemic in this family, or the timing where Jesus was limited in his ability? Verse 40, I'm going to just continue here, and then I'm going to wrap all this up together. Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe..." Now he's speaking to everyone in front of the tomb. "Did I not tell you that if you believe," there's the word again, these are all people who believe. They all believe he's God's son. They all believe he can heal. We're hearing that from many of them. "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" Glory is this Bible word. It can sound like a churchy word that means the remarkable, the extraordinary of God, that when you experience it, when you experience the extraordinary of God, it leaves you in awe. It leaves you breathless. Like, this is amazing. When the disciples are like, even the wind and waves obey him, they're speaking of his glory. That's what glory means. "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" He's hinting here at a different level of belief. So they took away the stone just as Jesus instructed. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you've always heard me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here," Jesus says, "that they may believe that you sent me." Again, people who already believe. He must be talking about belief in something they haven't thought was possible yet. Belief in him at a new level, to a new degree that they haven't comprehended yet. Then Jesus, in this loud voice, calls out to the tomb, "Lazarus, come out of the tomb." And this dead man walks out in all of the wrappings, and the people race to him and start unwrapping Lazarus and interacting with him. And therefore, and this is like such an understatement, therefore many of the Jews who'd come to visit Mary, who had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. Again, isn't that interesting? People who already believed in him. Everyone in this story believes in him. And they are all saying he heals people. If he had been here. Even others that aren't in the family are saying, couldn't he heal Lazarus the way we saw him heal the blind man? These are all believers. And yet, verse 45 says, therefore many of the Jews who'd come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went and told the Pharisees what Jesus had done. And the story ends in verse 53. So from that day forward, the Pharisees plotted to take his life. All of this is a picture of what's coming on Easter. We get so hung up on Good Friday. And I believe that a lot of us end up worshiping the Jesus of Good Friday. And thank God that Jesus went to the cross for our sins. And we revere it and we see it as sacred, and it's so much a part of our worship. All around the world, We have crucifixes hanging in churches everywhere and on people's walls in their homes. But we don't encounter and really experience the glory, the remarkable, the full, complete, extraordinary of God until the resurrection. I had a guy write me a couple months ago that said he'd been listening to me online, to DCC online, and was interested in visiting, but he wanted to make sure that I don't use the word sin, that I don't call people sinful. He did not want me to say that he was a sinner. And I don't use that word very much unless I'm putting it in context, like I'm going to here. He was telling me, I don't want to come to your church and be told I'm bad. And that's what a lot of people think of this word sin. Jesus has come to go to the cross. He came to go to the cross to take our sin. And some people struggle with that because they think it's bad. Jesus is calling me bad. Jesus doesn't, in Scripture, doesn't refer to sin as bad, making somebody bad. Sin means dead. Jesus didn't come for bad people. He came for dead people. And Jesus is trying to, just before what all of his closest followers and friends are going to encounter in the days ahead on Easter week, he's trying to give them this precursor, this foreshadow that when the crisis grows worse than you could imagine, I'm still with you. I'm still at work. I know what I'm doing, and we're going to come through the other side in full life. That is what I've come to do for you. And the ultimate crisis that Jesus came to address in our lives, we're in this pandemic right now. We don't, and some days we don't see an end in sight. I hope we're starting to see an end in sight. The curve has definitely happened, at least in New York. We're affected by the economy and people's jobs, and we're concerned for doctors and nurses, and we've been talking about that in this series. Jesus is almost allowing for a short period of time the crisis here to grow worse as a foreshadow of the ultimate crisis that he's going to endure on the cross. The one that they've put all of their hope in about 7 or 8 days, they're going to watch be brutally murdered and put on a cross and die. And he's trying to help them see, and he's trying to help you and me see, that he has come not just with the power to heal the sick, but to actually raise the dead, have life over death, have power over death, over our death, our relationships' death. If your job ends in a total crisis, Jesus has power over that kind of death. The most discouraging thing that you and I can imagine or experience, Jesus is teaching us he has power. If he has power over death, he has power over everything. When Jesus got word that Lazarus was sick, he didn't delay for a couple of days because he stopped caring about Lazarus, or he was procrastinating, or distracted, or just preoccupied with his own thing. Jesus delays so that you and I would believe that the God who could raise somebody from physical death would be the same one who could raise all of us from spiritual death. And I'll say that again. Jesus delayed in getting back to Lazarus, not because he didn't care about Lazarus anymore or because he just gets distracted sometimes. Jesus knows every storm. He's with us in every storm. He knows exactly what's happening. And he uses the storm in the moment to teach us and grow us and open our eyes more with faith, moving us from fear more to faith in who he is. Jesus didn't delay going to Lazarus because he was indifferent. He was trying to help you and me believe that the one who could raise a man, a person, from physical death would be the same one who could conquer all of our death in any kind of form or fashion, who could conquer the greatest crisis. If the crisis grows worse than we could imagine, he has power over it. I wrote here that what God is showing us so clearly in Jesus' dialogues with the disciples, he's asleep and, well, he's actually dead, but we're not going to go yet. And then 2 days later, now we're going to go. It just seems so bizarre early in my faith. What God is showing us in this dialogue that Jesus has with the disciples is that death is nothing to Jesus. A person's body dying is nothing to God in the kingdom of God. Waking the body up is like waking somebody who's dead up from sleep in God's kingdom. to Jesus, he promises that he will, for all those who believe in his power over death, awaken all of us to anything that's holding us back, to any storm that threatens us, to any crisis we face, even if the crisis grows worse before it gets better. Jesus is teaching us that he has power over all of those things. The real difficulty is not bringing a dead body back to life. What God's ultimate challenge is dealing with our spiritual crisis, our spiritual storm, our separation from God. When Jesus came to address our sin on the cross, he didn't come to judge us. In fact, John 3:17 says, I didn't come to condemn the world, I came to give life. In addressing our sin, Jesus isn't saying you're bad people, he's saying you're dead. You're dead. And one of the signs I've learned of spiritual death is fear. People who live in fear are people who are just dead. They may be creative and they may have great relationships with people, but their default comes back to fear. There's all kinds of death in our lives, in relationships. We have trigger points that can trigger anger, bad habits. These are all forms of death that we face. Jesus came to take all of our selfishness, all that breaks us and separates us from God on the cross so that we could be fully alive. It's in the storm or crisis that we find out if we're people who really live in hope, really live in promise, and in other words, live in faith, or for people who are gripped by fear. That always is found out in the storm or in the crisis. Fear is toxic. Dead people, spiritually dead people, are fearful people. And Jesus is coming to say, I know what it is to go through the storm. I know what it is to stand at the tomb of your friend and weep. I'm going to bring you through this. I'm going to bring you through not just this pandemic that's happening right now in 2020. I've come to address your ultimate storm. The ultimate storm is the crisis that separates us from the Father, which is our sin. It is our selfish choosing and living by our own plans rather than seeking God's plan and God's kingdom first. It's just amazing to me that on this Easter Sunday, maybe for a lot of us, on Easter Sunday, God's call really becomes real. His call to come to life, to become fully alive by going all in with who Jesus is. Some of us, I think, have believed that he was really, really smart. He was really ethical. He offers good guidance. Some of us, I believe, I'm sure believe that he healed people and that he performed miracles. But there was a different kind of belief that Jesus was trying to draw out of his believers, out of those who already believed in him. And that was that the God, the Messiah, who had come and had power to bring a person back from physical death would be the same one who could bring all of us back from spiritual death. The very thing that separates you and me from God, from a relationship with God, from walking in God's promise in life. And that's our sin. I'm going to pray with you on this Easter Sunday. And again, I'm going to encourage you, if this is new to you, if you're taking a risk here and about to cross the line of faith with me in this prayer, let me know. Just send me a note, and you can do that here through the chat window. You can email the church. I would love to just send you some more information and great places to read, and I'd just love to hear from you. If Jesus was bold enough to go to the cross for us, I really think in our new faith we should be bold enough to say, hey, I've crossed the line of faith. It's really a simple prayer like this. God, I have maybe sometimes been a religious person, maybe not, but what you're talking about here, I sense in my heart, is really not even about religion. It's about knowing you. It's about knowing you in your full power, like the glory of Jesus, to be able to bring somebody back from the dead, to be able to defeat death. And so in this crisis we face in this world, I'm recognizing that my ultimate crisis is the crisis of my sin, the crisis of my separation from God. And so Jesus, I believe that's why you went to the cross, and I believe you defeated all of it 3 days later when you came back from the dead. I put my faith in you. I don't have it all figured out, but I believe in you. I put my belief in you that you weren't just a miracle worker. You actually bring dead things back to life. You actually have life in the apex of the storm. Thank you for hearing my prayer. I put my faith in you, Jesus, and I trust that you'll never leave me. Wow, I'm going to be honest. It's such a weird thing to be talking into a camera lens on Easter Sunday, and yet I'm imagining a lot of my friends and a lot of you here as I talk. No one person certainly, but just so many people that I care about. And I hope that I did not get in the way or confuse anything that I really believe is God's heart for us today on this Easter. Send me a note if you have prayed and talked to God, maybe for the first time and maybe the first time in a long time, expressing your faith in Jesus. I'd love to know, and I'd love to encourage you along the way. I love you guys on this Easter. I'm going to, before I sign off, just tell you about two things coming up. One is next Sunday, we continue with the All in the Same Boat series. We're going to continue with that here in the weeks to come, which I'm excited about, and I've gotten a lot of notes from you, and a lot of you are inviting your friends to join us, so continue to do that. And then this Saturday, Emily Stapleton's going to be leading us in yoga at 10 a.m. on Saturday morning. You can access that virtually online, just like you do this here on Sunday mornings at the top of our website. And she is going to focus during that hour of yoga on the verse in 1 Peter, cast all of your anxieties on me, for I care for you. And I think that's going to be a really unique time for us. And like Steve said just a little bit ago, you've got no excuses. You're in the privacy, you're in home, nobody's going to judge you. I love you guys so much. Happy Easter. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys like this here in the coming week.
We love that you were with us celebrating. We have so much to be thankful for on this Easter Sunday. So let's close our time together celebrating who God is and that we have this amazing life that's free in Him.
Let's sing together. Alone in my sorrow and dead in my sin, lost without hope and no place to begin. Your love made a way to let mercy come in. When death was arrested and my life began, ash was redeemed, only beauty remains. And my orphan heart was given a name. My mourning grew quiet, my feet rose to dance. When death was arrested, my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new, now life begins with you. Released from my chains, I'm a prisoner no more. My shame was a ransom you faithfully bore. He canceled my debt and he called me his friend. When death was arrested displayed on a criminal's cross. And darkness rejoiced, although heaven had lost. But then Jesus arose with our freedom in hand. That's when death was arrested and my life began. That's when death was arrested and my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new, now life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new, now life begins with you. Oh, we're free, free, forever we're free. Come join the song of all the redeemed. Yeah, we're free, free, forever, amen. When death was arrested and my life began. We're free, free, forever we're free. Come join the song of all the redeemed. Yes, we're free, free, forever, amen. When death was arrested and my life began. When death was arrested and my life began. When death was arrested and my life began.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning on this Easter. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and enjoy your time with your family. Happy Easter, everyone.